Welcome to Tabernacle Baptist Church. We appreciate you being in God's house today. We're going to be taking a look at Judges chapter number 18. An interesting thought that is given to us at the beginning of chapter number 17, actually a little bit in the midst of 17 in verse number 6. A key verse that we'll see not only in the dealing of the situation that we read about in chapter number 17, but as we get towards the book of Judges, we find that over and over again now that we will see the description that's given in verse number 6. In chapter number 17:6, it says, "In those days there was no king of Israel, or no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes." There was no leadership, and of course we can kind of see that as we dealt with the account in chapter 17 of Micah, not the minor prophet Micah, but this Micah who decided to steal money from his mother. Then he confessed it, and his mother said, "That's a great thing that you've done. In fact, you're so wonderful that you confessed that you took my money. I'm going to give it back to you so that you can have gods made, molten gods, and also gods that have been hewn out of stone, and probably as well the graven images that have been chiseled out of stone and maybe out of wood." And Micah also finds a Levite wandering through and says, "Oh boy, a religious man. We'll get him to be our priest of our gods." And so you think, okay, this is so perverted and all of this, but I want you to see that we find a truth in this passage of Scripture, that there are men, when they're doing what they want to do, they excuse themselves while accusing others. Do you see that in politics, where some are excusing themselves and their friends while accusing others? Well, we see that often, but that's a natural tendency of man. You can tell God's not in control when the natural tendency of our leaders, as Micah here in chapter number 17, is to excuse themselves and say, "Oh, I had a good reason to do this, but the fellow that's my opponent, he doesn't have a good reason for doing what he does," and they're excusing themselves while accusing others. We know that God's not in control here, and so we find that as we go to chapter number 18, in verse number 1, "In those days there was no king in Israel. And in those days the tribe of Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in, for unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel." So the tribe of Dan, the Danites, did not have a place to stay. And so as they came by where Micah was, they took Micah's idols. They coerced Michael's priest, and of course there was nothing Micah could do. He was dealing with an army of men, and there he was by himself. His gods couldn't help him. They were just made of wood and metal. So these that were the Danites took Micah's, in fact, as Micah stood up, he said, "Now wait a minute now, remember, we've got this number. You're the only one. You could get in a lot of trouble if you try to come up against us. You need to just go back to your house and just let everything be." And so Micah was left with nothing. Micah realizes now he has nothing. He had nothing when he had the idols. He had nothing when he had a Levite that was idolatrous in his ministry, as you would call it, to deal with the idols. And yet Micah left alone, but this is just a realization of what he already had. And the Danites taking the idols and having the Levite minister for them. And it's interesting that they find a place that they want to inhabit, and it has a group of people in it that have been they're incapable of taking up for themselves. They're not armed. These are people that have been prosperous and living in peace. It would not have been it would not have been an unusual thing for the Danites just to come and say, look, we'd like to live here, and here you are here, and you're prosperous, everything's going well, we'd like to share this land with you. But instead, they claimed it a great victory to go in where these people were and burn their cities to the ground. All the prosperity that these people had made, the Danites destroyed. Now, this wasn't the word of the Lord. The Lord didn't say go in and destroy them. This was their own decision. They destroyed the cities, they killed the people with the sword, and left the land barren. They said, this is our land now, we're going to take it. And this is where we get to verse number 29. And it says, and they called the name of that city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. So we find here that the Danites, as they came into this place, destroyed the inhabitants. And this is without God's permission. This is not asking, Lord, what would you have us do? And what gods would they turn to if they were going to get some sort of permission? They had false gods, and they had a minister that was perverted. Their Levite was a perverted man, because he should have been serving the Lord. He should have been watching out for God's things. He should have been able to tell the Danites, look, don't serve these idols. If you want to serve the living God, I will help you, because I am a Levite. But they took him in his religious, you'd have to say pedigree, because he had been chosen to be a part of the laborers in the tabernacle and later in the temple. The Levites were. So he had religious pedigree, but he used it to bring idolatry into the Danite community. And of course, let's read here where it says in verse number 30, and the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, son of Gershon, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. Now that's sad. They had held on. They could have held on to what Moses had written about in the Pentateuch. They could have held on to what Joshua had declared in the book of Joshua, but instead, what did they do? They went into idolatry, stealing a graven image. Can you imagine having a whole religious system based on the fact that you stole an image from somebody else to make that image your God? A religion that was based on theft, and then a man who was a minister, and he should have been ministering God, and that ministry based on perversion, and of course the love of money, the root of all evil. Verse number 31, and they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. So now, it's an interesting thought before we get into chapter number 19. An interesting thought about this, that they could have gone to Shiloh. They could have worshiped the true and living God. But instead of going after what even they knew the Levite had had this spiritual pedigree because of what God had told Moses to do with the sons of Aaron to become priests, and the Levites to become the helper of the temple, the tabernacle, and later the temple. There was an opportunity for them to see the link between the Levite, even though he was perverted, and what they did in exalting him, because he was a man that was in a position where he could have be a servant to God and led them to Shiloh. He could have said to the Danites, now look, you've got a false god. God's so weak that it couldn't even keep itself in the hands of Micah, who was his creator, so to speak. Micah had created this god, and the Danites had stolen this god, this weak, ineffective god. They had a perverted priest. They had a procured god that they had stolen. and there was nothing there, and that they could have turned to Shiloh and said, we need to serve the true and living God. Now you need to remember about Shiloh, it will come up a little bit later in some of the studies that we have. But now we go to chapter number 19. Now in the next few chapters, we will read this account of one of the most unusual, and I guess you'd have to say as we go to that first verse, and it came to pass in those days when there was no king of Israel. As we read through this and we see the problems that are coming to pass in all of this, and the way that this is recorded, so that we say, what is going on here? Some of it sounds like, well, almost insanity. And as we read through some of it, we'll realize that people were, they were not concerned about what God was going to do. In a large part, and I think there's a place even here where we'll find that they need to go to ask the Lord about something. But isn't it strange that people go to ask the Lord about something and they don't actually want God's will? I think they just go through the motions. Let's take a look at this. We'll be doing quite a fair amount of reading here. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine of Bethlehem, Judah. And his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there for 4 whole months. This kind of a little bit reminiscent of Samson just a few chapters back, and him taking a wife, and then Samson got mad and left, and his wife was given to his best friend. But here we find that he takes concubine, and she's not faithful to him, and goes into prostitution. And then as she leaves him to stay at her father's house. Verse number 3, and her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her, and to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodge there. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. Verse number 7, and when the man rose up to depart, the father-in-law urged him, therefore he lodged there again. And he arose early in the morning, the 5th day, to depart. And the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and did eat, both of them. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, behold, now the day draweth toward evening. I pray you tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry. And tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. But the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine also was with him. And when they were in Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, come, I pray thee, and let us turn in unto this city of the Jebusites, and lodge in it. And his master said unto him, we will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger, that is not the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said unto his servant, come and let us draw near to one of these places, to lodge all night in Gibeah or in Ramah. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside thither to go in and lodge in Gibeah. And when he had went in, he sat him down on the street of the city, for there was no man that took them into the house to lodging. Now, we'll stop there just a minute just to see what's going on. Here's the Levite. He has a concubine. A concubine was unfaithful to him. He went to get her from her father's house to bring her back with him, and has been persuaded by him to wait. You know, there's always danger in waiting to do those things that maybe need to be done. And you see that the father-in-law was very strong in him staying there. He didn't want him to leave. He said, stay another day, and probably would have convinced him, if he could have, to stay much longer than he did. I don't know if there was that love for that daughter. He said, I don't want you to leave. You're here. You've made the family complete. You came back together. You stay here. But at the end, this was late in the day when he decided to leave. Not a wise thing. Knowing that he would have to find lodging that night in the first place, but also that he would have to deal with those along the way. And as he came through Jebus, he went through there because of saying, I don't want to stay among strangers. I want to stay among family members. But I want you to see that in a situation, as we see in verse number 1, and it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel. He was thinking, if I can get through where the Jebusites are, and I can get to the place where I can get among my brethren, the Benjamites, well, I won't have any problem there. They will be my friends. They will welcome me. And yet we find that even here, as he is in Gibeah and looking for a place to stay, first of all, no one wants to take them in. There's no one that has the hospitality of the family to take them in. And we'll find out that this is a dangerous situation for him to be in the street. Verse number 16, and behold, there came an old man from his work out in the field at even. Everything else evidently was locked up and for a reason, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. Verse number 17, and when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And he said unto him, we are passing for Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim, from whence I am, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me into house. Yet there were both straw and provender for our asses, and there's bread and wine also for me and my handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servant. There's no want of anything. And the old man said, peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. Now, there was a danger here that everyone that they had seen about lodging had said, you're on your own. There was not the love. And as we see this, we see that there was this old man, and I think the reason that he felt like he could labor in the field and stay out late, that the danger was not as prevalent to him because he was an old man. But as he came in and found this Levite and found his concubine and found his asses and the servant there, he said, you can't stay out in the street. So verse number 21 says, he brought him into his house and gave provender unto his asses, and they washed their feet and did eat and drink. Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. Now you find the same thing happening in the Old Testament when the angels came to get Lot out of the city. And when the men of the city saw Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, they came and they surrounded Lot's house and said, "Send these men out that we may know them." These were perverted people. And they were not worried about anything. And notice, I think that's why, two reasons here. One, because of the fact that they were who they were, the people in the area couldn't trust the strangers that came through. But neither could they see the need that this Levite had, because he was in danger. For these men of Belial, yes, they were those that followed Satan. They were men of Belial, and they were going to try to attack him and assault him. And they said to the old man, "Send out this man." Verse number 23. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, "Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house. Do not this folly." I want you to see the answer he had, and you say, "Preacher, this is so perverted." But notice verse number 24. "Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing." Look what they were doing. Not only were there all these neighbors who had refused to take them in because of the danger of the street, and here this Levite was, he says, "We're among brethren now, we're safe." But there's no safety where there is no work of God. There's no safety where there's no leadership from the Lord. And I want you to see that this is how this follows through here. But the men would not hearken to him. So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her, and abused her all night until the morning. When the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning. Now, doesn't it give the indication that after he had sent his own concubine out to be abused by this group of men, you know that she's probably not going to survive. And of course, we'll get to that part in just a minute. But as the light dawn broke, they let her go, and here she is trying to get back to the place where she thought it would be safe. And what was her husband doing? He was asleep, evidently. He had gone to sleep. There was no care for his wife. You'd think that after all he had gone through to get her back, and all that her father-in-law, or all her father had done to make the son-in-law welcome, there would be a little bit more concern. And to think that this was a Levite, a man who, he said he was going to the house of the Lord. He said he was going to Shiloh. But what is going on here? Why would he have so little concern about that? And why would he not turn to the Lord? Here's a Levite. Why didn't he fall on his knees? Why didn't he say, "Lord, please deliver me from this perverseness"? We see them doing what man does sometimes in a situation that's dangerous. They try to solve the problem themselves. Do you think God could have intervened on behalf? Surely he could have. But no one called on the Lord. No one asked for deliverance. And their solution was to sacrifice this woman. Now, she hadn't been faithful, but she was going to be brought back by her husband. She was going to be taken back in. There was a spirit of forgiveness, evidently. But when it came right down to it, the man said, no, you go out there and be with them. I can't imagine how horrified she was during the night. I can't imagine what she went through during the night, because the husband said, I need to get some sleep. You go out there and you do what you need to do so that you can keep me safe. Verse number 27 again, and her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. Now notice, his first action is not to run to her to see how she was, but to walk past her, evidently, and said unto her, Up, and let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up and gat him unto his place. And when he was come into his house, he took a knife, and laid hold on his concubine, and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces, and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. What a macabre thing to do. To take your wife after being abused, and then taking her home, and notice here, it says, with her bones into 12 pieces, and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. And it was so that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done, nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider of it, take advice, speak your minds. Can you imagine getting that delivery? A part of this woman's body who had been abused all night by the Benjamites. Now, we're going to continue this in chapter number 20. But again, we have to go back to verse number 1. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel. Of course, the inclination to that according to 17:6. But every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You see where that leads? Aren't we dealing with some of those same things today? People that have left God, where have they gone to? They've gone to perversion. They've gone to wickedness. They've gone to killing. All these things mentioned here because they left the things of God. And notice the unconcern for human life by the old man. I'll send out my daughter and you can have your way with her, and he'll send out his wife and have his way with, you can have your way with her. There didn't seem to be any concern about the lives of the innocent. And that's what we have when we're dealing with the book of Judges. Now, I want to tell you this as we get to the end of this. I know we need to close, but we're going to step from this book of Judges into an event that happened in the book of Judges. And we'll see the hand of God working, even though there were many people that did not call on the name of the Lord, that were God's people, that had what they needed to be right, but didn't use it. There is some good news in the time of Judges, even though it does not seem to be recorded, because the book of Judges is dealing with man's wickedness and also with God's mercy on the nation of Israel.